Now it is D-Day in Hiroshima. 7 leaders, 6 men and 1 woman are meeting at the annual Group of 7 summit. Bilaterals are ongoing as we speak and all preps have been made for the high-stakes meeting. The latest leader to land in the Japanese city is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now India is present as an observer state and all eyes are on his meeting with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. This will mark their first in-person interaction since Russia first invaded Ukraine. It will be interesting how the meeting goes. Unlike the G7 countries, India has maintained its neutral stance on the war. New Delhi has urged that the bloodshed should end, however has not blamed Russia for it. But it looks like Kiev is trying to come to a middle ground. By holding meetings with Modi and addressing last year's G20 summit, it is a sign that Volodymyr Zelensky is making his pitch to the global south. Now the day began with an inaugural plenary meeting in Hiroshima. On your screens are Joe Biden of the United States, Rishi Sunak of United Kingdom, Justin Trudeau of Canada, Olaf Scholz of Germany, Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Emmanuel Macron of France and Japan's Fumio Kishida, the host leader. Now the longest shadows will be cast by 2 countries that are not even present at the summit. When the leaders enter the big hall, Russia and China will be the 2 elephants in the room. The leaders plan to tighten sanctions on Russia and reports suggest that they might be directly targeting at energy and exports that are aiding Moscow's war effort. Now the new moves will target sanctions evasion involving 3rd countries. It will also be aimed at undermining Russia's future energy production. Now, in a recent statement published by the host country, the G7 has demanded a complete withdrawal of Russian troops. The official statement reads, and I'm quoting here, Russia should immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw its troops and military equipment from the entire internationally recognized territory of Ukraine. Now for more on this, we are being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibbu, live from Ground Zero in Hiroshima. Welcome to the broadcast, Siddhant. It will be interesting, the meeting between Indian Prime Minister and the Ukrainian President. After all, New Delhi has a stance on the war that does not really align with Ukraine's liking. Yet Kiev is pushing for a middle ground. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, yes, right now I can first come to the location where I'm standing. I'm standing at the place where the Indian Prime Minister is going to shortly arrive. He has already reached Hiroshima, we all know. And right now I'm surrounded by a lot of commotion, but a lot of Indian diaspora members who are eagerly waiting to welcome the Indian Prime Minister. Let me give you a sense, a flavor of what's happening on the ground. These are members of the Indian diaspora and my camera person can show you that how they are eagerly waiting the Indian Prime Minister's arrival. Let's try to speak to some of these members of the Indian diaspora. Sir, if you can speak to us, how do you feel? How do you plan to welcome the Indian Prime Minister? Is shortly arriving in a few minutes.
Like we are very excited to see our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji. Like we were waiting from like long hours. So yeah, we are very excited to meet him today.
Very excited to meet the Indian Prime Minister. And usually these are the welcoming people everywhere you see across the world. When the Indian Prime Minister comes, he will be traveling to Sydney as well. I expect a larger diaspora member there, grouping there, waiting to welcome the Indian Prime Minister. Hiroshima has very small population of the Indians, but largely these Indians have traveled across Japan and come to Hiroshima. Now, talking about the G7, we know that the focus during the G7 summit remains the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We are expecting a strong joint statement by the G7 leaders talking about the Russian action in Ukraine and strongly condemning it and also coming out with fresh set of sanctions. And one big story that is happening in the context of India is the meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. Now, this is the first meeting between the two leaders since the conflict conflict started last year, and it is expected to be an important meeting. India, of course, is going to emphasize that there should be the need to sit together, the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, and resolve the situation on the ground. But expectedly, the Ukrainian side is going to focus that the Indian side, who is the chair of the G20, should invite Ukraine to attend this mega summit, because that was the expectation when the Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister had visited New Delhi.
Right. Now, China is going to be the other elephant in the room, Siddhant, apart from Russia. What kind of a consensus are we expecting from the G7, and how will it play out with New Delhi's policy on the issue?
Well, when it comes to China, that is another key worry for the G7 countries, and also many of the invited countries as well. We know that India is facing a major issue when it comes to China, the Chinese build-up on its northern borders. The Japanese are facing a major issue when it comes to the Senkaku Islands. So largely we do expect mention of China. In fact, the Japanese Prime Minister had several bilaterals on Thursday, and we saw those bilaterals. One thing was common, that the mention of China, the challenges China poses, and that remains the dominating factor. In fact, the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Chinese President Xi Jinping aren't invited, but they are the top focus during this year's G7 summit, whether it's the grouping or invited countries. Japan has invited 8 countries, which includes India, Australia, Indonesia, Vietnam. Many of these countries, like for example Australia, have been facing economic coercion by the Chinese.
All right, Siddhant. Now, the Indian diaspora has become like a key element in every single foreign visit that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi embarks, and Hiroshima has shown that it is no different. Thank you for speaking to us, Siddhant, from Ground Zero. We will be coming back to you as and when developments happen.